Airline steward denied admittance to older person of color 5 minutes after the fact. Stunning truth uncovered in this holding video. We dive into a stunning episode that unfurled on a new flight, including an airline steward and an old person of color. What started as an apparently standard boarding process immediately swelled into a circumstance that left numerous travelers shocked and scrutinizing the activities of the carrier staff. We'd very much want to hear, assuming that you're amped up for this story. In the event that you lived it up watching the video, feel free to squeeze one on the off chance that that is not true. Simply press 0. Your input really persuades me to gather seriously inspiring and critical stories. Airline steward will not help an older individual of color stunned to learn she claims the whole air terminal. What might you do, assuming somebody you trusted to help and serve you treated you with sheer discourtesy, leaving you embarrassed in front of many outsiders? Imagine a scenario in which only hours after the fact you had the ability to change their lives perpetually. Today we'll reveal the tale of Evelyn Harper, an older lady whose peaceful strength was dismissed by a flight group. However, they had no thought what her identity was or what she would do next. The bend toward the end will leave you puzzled. Before we start, where are you watching from today? Let us in the remarks, assuming you love moving stories of flexibility and equity. Make a point to hit that like button, share this video, and buy in for additional mind-boggling stories. Your help assists us share these significant stories with much more individuals currently. How about we get into it? The clamoring air terminal murmured with the typical orchestra of declarations, strides, and the moving of gear wheels. In the midst of the swarm, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, an old black woman in her late 70s, moved with a calm respect, wearing a perfectly squeezed botanical dress and grasping a very much worn stick. She drew nearer the loading up entryway for her flight. Her eyes, however kind, mirrored the exhaustion of a long excursion. The door specialist scarcely looked at her as she gave over her ticket. 18C, he said in a droning voice, directing her to the stream scaffold. Evelyn offered a considerate grin, however her hands shuddered somewhat under the weight of her lightweight suitcase. Inside were her fundamentals, a book, a few bites, and an variety of meds she was unable to risk being isolated from. As she entered the airplane, the cool air inside hit her face a welcome help from the clamoring terminal. She faltered close to the entryway, looking at the limited path ahead and the columns of travelers previously sinking into their seats. Her eyes dashed to the above canisters, generally the vast majority of which were at that point completely filled. "Excuse me, Miss," Evelyn expressed delicately to a close-by airline steward wearing a fresh uniform and a training grin. Her informal ID read Chloe Imprints. "Might you at some point assist me with putting my pack up there? My arms aren't serious areas of strength, for so they used to be." Chloe's grin vanished immediately. She gazed Evelyn upward and down, her demeanor incomprehensible at first, then touched with irritation. "Ma'am, we support travelers to deal with their own gear," she said briefly, motioning dubiously toward the canister. "It's aircraft strategy." Evelyn flickered, astounded. "I see, yet I truly can't lift this, it's weighty for me." Chloe murmured noisily enough to draw the consideration of neighboring travelers. "Fine," she mumbled softly. However, her nonverbal communication stayed solid. As opposed to helping straightforwardly, she went to a more youthful male traveler who had recently sunk into a seat. "Sir, might you at any point help her?" she asked, her tone sharp and value-based. The man, surprised, gestured and immediately remained. "Obviously," he said sympathetically, taking the sack from Evelyn. "Also, putting away it above." "Thank you," Evelyn mumbled, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. She stayed away from eye-to-eye connection with Chloe, who had previously strolled off without one more word. As Evelyn advanced toward her seat, she passed columns of uninterested countenances. A couple of travelers offered her respectful grins, yet most were too fascinated in their telephones or discussions to see her battle. She at last arrived at 18C, path seat. Bringing down herself cautiously, she jumped as her knee twinged, an excruciating sign of her joint inflammation. Minutes after the fact, the chief's voice popped over the radio inviting everybody on board. Evelyn changed her shot and took a full breath, attempting to shake off the sting of Chloe's pompousness. She looked through the window at the region of landing area. The sight was typically a wellspring of solace. However, today the glow of her standard hopefulness was blurred by the uncomfortable feeling that this flight may be surprisingly lengthy, not on account of time but since of how little it caused her to feel. Unbeknownst to Evelyn, this apparently common flight was going to redirect many lives, including her own. The plane had been airborne for simply under an hour when Mrs. Evelyn Harper felt the obvious ache of her condition. The air was dry and she wanted water to take her drug. She looked at the airline steward call button over her seat, delaying the slightest bit. She loathed causing to notice herself, yet knew the significance of remaining on plan with her pills. With a tranquil murmur she squeezed the button. A delicate ring repeated above and she stood by without complaining. Her hands collapsed in her lap. Minutes ticked by. The orderly went all over the path appropriating drinks and snacks, yet nobody moved toward her seat. Evelyn moved awkwardly, projecting looks at different travelers who got amenable grins in mindful help. At last Chloe Marks seemed, her articulation clear yet her attitude transmitting anxiety. "Yes ma'am," she asked straight, standing sufficiently near make Evelyn slant her head back to meet her look. "I'm sorry to annoy you," Evelyn started delicately. "Might I at some point have some water? Satisfy, I really want to take my medicine." Chloe raised an eyebrow, her tone cut weak, coming through with the beverage administration in practically no time. "You can hold on up to that point." Evelyn squinted, taken aback. "It's simply I truly need to take it now." Assuming no one minds, Chloe intruded on her, voice developing more keen. "I previously said we'll serve drinks soon. I can't drop everything for one individual." The words stung. Evelyn's hold fixed on her stick, her knuckles becoming white. "I comprehend," she answered unobtrusively, her voice shudder somewhat. "However, it's significant for my well-being," Chloe murmured discernibly. Drawing the consideration of a close-by traveler, a man in a suit situated across the walkway scowled as he noticed the collaboration. Chloe saw him watching and feigned exacerbation somewhat prior to turning around to Evelyn. "Fine," she murmured. "I'll get it." She strolled off energetically, returning after what felt like an unfathomable length of time with a little plastic cup of water. Without a word she put it on Evelyn's collapsible table, the movement unexpected and absent any and all care, causing a couple of drops to spill. "Here," Chloe said, her tone pompous. Then, without sitting tight, for she took her drug peacefully, her eyes fixed on the folding table, attempting to keep down tears. She felt little imperceptible. A lifetime of flexibility had trained her to persevere through outrages like this. However, it didn't make them hurt any less. The man across the path hung over somewhat, his voice low. "Ma'am, are all of you right?" Evelyn dealt with a weak grin, gesturing. "I'm fine, thank you." However, she wasn't fine. Her heart ached, not from the pills she had taken but rather from the heaviness of Chloe's chilliness, a sign of how individuals like her were frequently treated, as not exactly unbeknownst to Chloe or any other person on the flight. Evelyn Harper was not only a fragile older lady traveling solo, she was the mother of a far man more power than anybody on that plane could envision, and soon that power would be felt in manners they couldn't start to expect. The flight sunk into its mid-excursion. Calm travelers busied themselves with films, books, or icon prattle. Mrs. Evelyn Harper sat unobtrusively in Her seat, her look fixed on the mists outside the window. She attempted to push the previous trade with Chloe Marks out of her psyche, yet the embarrassment waited like an unwanted shadow even moved. Awkwardly feeling the solidness in her joints escalate, she squeezed the orderly call button again, expecting something to reduce the hurt in her back. A pad or a warm cover would do. Minutes passed and the light above her seat flickered unanswered. Across the path a youthful mother called for help and Chloe answered inside seconds, her disposition especially lively as she gave the lady a jug of water. Evelyn stood by without complaining, observing everything Chloe might do. Definitely she had seen the call light when Chloe passed by her seat minutes after the fact. Without a word, Evelyn marshaled the boldness to shout out, "Excuse me, miss," she said delicately, "could I inconvenience you for a sweeping?" Chloe quit, turning gradually as though the solicitation was an interference to her very presence. "We need more for everybody," she answered briefly, not trying to check. "Assuming that there were any left, you ought to have brought one in the event that you wanted it." Evelyn squinted, dazed by the pompous tone. "I didn't understand it would be so chilly," she expressed, attempting to stay amiable. If without another word she left, leaving Evelyn feeling more modest than before. The moment extended into an hour and Chloe never got back with a sweeping or an clarification. Rather, Evelyn watched her serve beverages to different travelers, visiting pleasantly with those she considered worth her time. Maybe Evelyn had stopped existing in her eyes. Evelyn's need for the sweeping became auxiliary to the developing throb in her soul. The airline steward conduct wasn't simply oblivious, it felt conscious, determined. Even every little slight, each defer in assistance, each cut word worked on her nobility. The last affront came when the orderlies started serving dinners. Chloe halted at Evelyn's line, looked at her and skirted her completely, moving to the following traveler without offering her a plate. Evelyn lifted a provisional hand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice faltering. "I accept." "I was missed." Chloe turned with an overstated moan, holding the dinner truck. "Consistent goodness." "Right," she said contemptuously. "What do you need, chicken or pasta?" "Chicken, please," Evelyn answered her. "I'm fine," she murmured back. However, her voice broke. The man across the passageway, who had been noticing everything, squinted his eyes at Chloe as she dropped further down the path. "Unfathomable," he mumbled, shaking his head. Evelyn sat in quiet, her feast immaculate. She gripped her stick firmly, establishing herself in its commonality. She had persevered far more awful in the course of her life. However, the sting of Chloe's conduct cut profound. Little did Chloe know the old lady she so recklessly excused had a child who ved his mom regardless of anything else. When he figured out what had happened, the results would be quick and unrelenting. The plane landed with a slight shock, followed by the recognizable shriek of the arrival gear and the surge of motors easing back to an end. Around her, travelers moved in their seats, assembling their possessions, fully expecting landing. Miss Evelyn Harper sat unobtrusively, her fingers holding the handle of her stick, her soul overloaded by the occasions of the trip. As the seat bell sign darkened, Evelyn went after the above container to recover her carry-on. The stick she depended on made adjusting troublesome, and the container appeared to be outlandishly high. She looked around, expecting help. A close-by traveler, a young fellow who had watched her battle all through the flight, stood up and started to go after her pack before he could lift it down. "Chloe Marks," the airline steward mediated. "Sir, please stay situated until the travelers before you have left," she said strongly, her tone more legitimate than the circumstance justified. The young fellow wavered, his hands floating close to the sack. "I'm simply attempting to help her," he answered, signaling toward Evelyn. Chloe folded her arms, her stance inflexible. "We have methodology and everybody needs to follow them," she said immovably. Then with a fast look at Evelyn she added, Travelers ought to sit tight or be ready to deal with their own possessions. Evelyn's face ignited with embarrassment. The young fellow took a gander at her prior to retaking his seat. Chloe took no action to help her. Cold and distinction was obvious. Striving, Evelyn extended her slight arms toward the sack. The movement sent a sharp torment through her shoulder and the pack slipped from her grip. It hit the edge of the seat and tumbled to the floor, spilling its items, medicine bottles and a conveniently collapsed scarf, into the limited walkway. A few travelers went to look. A mumble of concern undulated through the columns. Chloe, standing a couple of feet away, murmured decisively, mumbling under her breath, "Gracious, for the good of paradise." The airline steward bowed down, not to help yet to assemble the dissipated things with the effectiveness of somebody satisfying a dreary task. She pushed the jugs once more into the sack and gave it to Evelyn without meeting her eyes. "Here," she expressed briefly prior to leaving, as though disavowing what is going on. Evelyn acknowledged the pack, her hands shaking as she got it. She felt the weight of different travelers' looks, some thoughtful, others only inquisitive. Her throat fixed, however, she constrained herself to hold her head high. She had carried on with a long existence of preliminaries, and she wouldn't allow this second to break her determination. Gradually Evelyn advanced down the path, her stick tapping delicately against the covered floor, a metronome to her consistent assurance. She left the airplane into the clamoring plane scaffold, where the cool air terminal air met her cheeks. Holding up toward the finish of the span was her child, Leon Harper. His tall edge told consideration even in the turmoil of the terminal. He was wearing a custom-made suit, his cleaned shoes mirroring the elevated lights. His articulation mellowed as he saw his mom, yet his sharp eyes promptly saw her drooped pose and the exhaustion carved all over. "Mother," Leon said heartily, venturing forward to take her sack. "How was the flight?" Evelyn delayed, her lips separating as though to answer, yet the words trapped in her throat. The heaviness of the embarrassment she got through was too new. She shook her head somewhat, her voice scarcely over a murmur. "It's fine, dear." Leon's temple wrinkled. He realized his mom excessively well to acknowledge her response at face esteem. His eyes dashed to the pack she gripped and the weak quake in her grasp. "What happened?" he asked, his tone firmer this time. "It's nothing," Evelyn answered, compelling a grin that didn't contact her eyes. "We should simply return home." Yet Leon wasn't persuaded. As they strolled through the terminal, Evelyn's quiet said a lot. Leon's brain dashed, sorting out the unpretentious hints. The carrier logo on her ticket got his attention, and his jaw fixed, assuming something had happened to his mom on that flight. Somebody planned to deal with serious consequences regarding it. When they arrived at the vehicle, Leon's choice was made. He wasn't simply her child, he was Leon Harper, the greater part investor of the very aircraft she had flown on, and by grieving the universe of the people who had abused his mom could never go back. The commute home was uncommonly tranquil. Leon Harper continued to look at his mom from the edge of his mother. He started tenderly breaking the quiet as they maneuvered into her carport. "I can see something happened. Kindly don't hush up about it." Evilly inside, as she loosened her safety belt, her developments slow and think, she went to confront her child, her stick leaning against the vehicle entryway. "Leon, it was nothing. I was unable to deal with," she said delicately. "I confronted more awful." Leon's jaw gripped. "Mother, don't dismiss it. I want to realize." Evelyn delayed, her eyes gushing in spite of her earnest attempts. She related the occasions of the flight, the pretentious tone of the airline steward, the refusal to help, the shame of spilling her effects in the path. Her voice shuddered as she expressed her words, a peaceful demonstration of the outrage she had gotten through. Leon tuned in peacefully, his knuckles brightening as he grasped the controlling wheel. When she completed, his appearance was mixed up, however his body transmitted strain. He breathed in profoundly, breathing out leisurely to consistent himself. "Thank you for letting me know, mother," he said at long last, his voice quieted. Quiet, however, conveying an edge of steel. "You didn't merit that, nobody does." Evelyn put a hand on his arm, her touch delicate. "Leon, guarantee me you won't raise a ruckus. It's over now." Leon constrained a tight grin, kissing her hand delicately. "I'll deal with it, mother," he said, his words layered with importance. "Presently head inside and get some rest." Subsequent to guaranteeing his mom was easily settled, Leon gotten back to his vehicle. He sat steering the ship, his telephone currently in his grasp, his sharp psyche sharpened by long periods of administration in the corporate world moved right into it. As the greater part investor of the carrier, Leon knew precisely who to contact and how to have an effect. He dialed a number. After a couple of rings, a drowsy voice addressed Mr. Harper. "Great night," said Alan Green, the carrier's head working official. "Is all that okay?" "No, Alan," Leon said, his tone estimated yet frosty. "Everything isn't okay. My mom just flew on one of our flights and she was treated with total lack of regard. I really want you to orchestrate a crisis meeting first thing tomorrow." "First thing?" Alan stammered, surprised by Leon's cut tone. "Obviously, sir. I'll inform the group." "Might you at any point give subtleties about what?" "Comprehended," Alan said rapidly, his voice tight. "I'll deal with it." Actually, Leon hung up without another word, his appearance dismal. He reclined in his seat, gazing out at the calm road. The carrier wasn't simply a business to him, it was an inheritance. He had worked eagerly to fabricate one that addressed inclusivity and regard. That his own mom had been abused under its flag was an affront he was unable to let slide. As Leon drove home, his brain beat with plans by grieving the flight team and the whole organization would advance precisely who they had crossed. He wasn't simply looking for a statement of regret. He planned to guarantee that such way of behaving could at absolutely no point ever occur in the future. Not to his mom, not to anybody. Unbeknownst to the airline stewards, the tempest they had incidentally incited was going to plunge, and it would leave an enduring mark on their lives. In the carrier they addressed the following morning, the aircraft's corporate base camp hummed with a surprising energy. Gossipy tidbits about a crisis meeting had spread rapidly, filling a feeling of disquiet among the staff. Alan Green, the head working official, rushed through the corridors, his face pale and drawn. He had gone through the late evening planning for the showdown he knew was unavoidable in the chief meeting room. The climate was tense. The flight team from Flight 267, including Chloe Marks, sat toward one side of the long table, their demeanors going from disarray to gentle disturbance. Chloe specifically looked resistant, her arms crossed as she murmured to a partner, "This is ludicrous." She mumbled, "I didn't do anything wrong." At the top of the table, Alan paced apprehensively, looking at his watch. He hadn't explained to the team why they were gathered, just that it included a high-need client concern. The way to the meeting room opened up and the room fell quiet. Leon Harper entered, his ordering presence hushing even the slightest murmurs. Wearing a custom-fitted naval force suit, his demeanor was quiet, however conveyed an undeniable power. He moved with reason, each step purposeful, as though he claimed the room as well as the very air inside it. "Great morning," Lon said, his voice even yet firm. He had his spot at the top of the table, his sharp look. The group traded uncomfortable looks. Chloe sat up straighter, her insubordination floundering somewhat under Leon's penetrating eyes. Alan immediately sat down close to Leon, bumbling with an envelope of reports. Leon's hands laid on the table, his fingers interlocked. "Before we start, I need to explain something. This gathering isn't just about a client protest, it's about an episode including somebody vital to me, my mom." The room froze. Chloe's disobedient articulation moved to one of caution. She looked around as though look for a departure course. "My mom, Evelyn Harper, was a traveler on Flight 267 Yesterday Leon proceeded with his tone immovable. She educated me regarding the treatment she got from the staff on board this flight. He stopped, letting his words hit home. The heaviness of his disclosure pushed down on the room like a mist. Chloe's face turned pale and different orderlies traded overreacted looks. Leon inclined forward, his voice sharp. Let me get straight to the point. My mom is major areas of strength for a confronted more in lady her lifetime than the majority of you could envision. However, what she ought to never need to confront is embarrassment on account of those addressing my aircraft. Alan moved awkwardly in his seat, his eyes shooting toward the group. Chloe opened her mouth to talk, yet Leon's look snapped to her, removing her before she could express a word. Miss Marks, Leon said, his tone frigid. Do you recall Mrs. Harper? Chloe gulped hard, her bluster disintegrating. I do, she stammered. However, I didn't mean you didn't intend what? Leon interfered with, his voice rising marginally. Didn't intend to overlook her call, light to reject her assistance, to let her assets spill into the path while you remained by uninterested. Chloe's mouth opened and shut, however no words came. The room was suffocatingly quiet. The unease overwhelming her pride was dismissed, her well-being was overlooked. Leon proceeded with his voice like a razor. And you, Miss Marks, are an impression of this carrier. Your activities or deficiency in that department tell our travelers precisely the amount we esteem them. Yesterday you told my mom she was useless. Chloe's eyes loaded up with tears. However, Lonk look didn't falter. I hold each worker here to a norm of regard and care. That standard was not just missed taking effect right now. Miss Marks is ended. I won't endure this sort of conduct in my carrier. Chloe heaved perceptibly, her face flushing with disgrace. Please Mr. Harper, enough, Leon said solidly, his tone ruling out contention. You've gotten your opportunity. Currently it's the ideal opportunity for results. Leon fixed, tending to the remainder of the room. Let this act as an illustration. Each traveler who loads up one of our planes merits the highest regard, paying little mind to what their identity is or where they come from. Assuming any of you neglect to meet that assumption, you will not have a spot here. Comprehended? A melody of mumbled arrangements occupied the room. Lyon's look waited on every one of them before he rose from his seat. Meeting dismissed, he said, icily, changing direction suddenly and leaving the room as the entryway shut behind him. Chloe sat frozen in her seat, her profession in ruins. Different orderlies stayed quiet, their overcomes scratched with dread and disgrace. They currently comprehended the expense of their activities and the tempest they had brought upon themselves. The meeting room was frightfully calm after Leon Harper's takeoff. The heaviness of his words weighted like a tempest cloud, pushing down on everybody present. Chloe Marks stayed situated, her face pale, her hands holding the edge of the table as though it could moor her to what was left of her disintegrating reality. I can't completely accept that this, she murmured, her voice scarcely perceptible. Her associates stayed away from her, look reluctant to gamble with relationship with the now excused airline steward. Individually they documented out of the room, leaving Chloe to sit alone with the cruel truth of her activities as the aftermath from the crisis meeting spread through the aircraft's positions. The repercussions undulated all over. Leon Harper's harsh mandate said a pressing tone that reverberated across each division. The staff realized this wasn't simply one more client support issue, it was a retribution, and nobody needed to be gotten on some unacceptable side of it. Soon after the gathering, Alan Green, the head working official, gathered his senior supervisory group. The order from Leon was clear: no stone was to be left unturned. Flight 267 was presently under a magnifying instrument, and each part of the group's presentation was being analyzed. Different travelers on the flight had recorded complaints referring to distracted help, inconsiderate communications and cavalier ways of behaving started to arise, and Chloe Marks's name showed up over and over as the examination developed. Plainly, this was certainly not a detached occurrence. Chloe had a recorded history of protests, yet many had been excused or deficiently tended to. Her managers, either out of carelessness or a longing to keep away from struggle, had permitted her way of behaving to persevere unrestrained at this point. Under Leon's examination, each disappointment in the framework was being uncovered. Leon changed his office into a war room for change. Reports came in continuously, everyone revealing new insight into the basic issues inside the carrier's culture. He pored over the discoveries with the accuracy of a specialist, distinguishing flimsy parts and requesting quick arrangements when Alan introduced a fundamental report on the examination. Leon's sharp eyes examined the pages, his demeanor unintelligible. After a second he put the record down and fixed Alan with a steely look. "This isn't just about Chloe Marks," Leon said, his voice quiet however firm. "This is about a culture that permitted her way of behaving to continue without some kind of restraint. I need to know how this occurred, and I need it fixed." Alan gestured apprehensively. "Yes sir, we proactively started carrying out remedial measures." "Great," Leon answered. "However, this isn't simply about fixing what's wrecked, it's tied in with setting another standard. I believe each representative starting from the top should comprehend that regard and pride aren't discretionary, they're compulsory. Insight about the aircraft's quick and conclusive activity started to spread. Travelers who had been on Flight 267 got customized expressions of remorse alongside vouchers for future travel. Many were intrigued by the straightforwardness. What's more, responsibility showed by the carrier an unmistakable difference to the business standard sluggish organization. One traveler, the young fellow who had attempted to help Mrs. Harper, imparted his experience to companions and family. "I've never seen an aircraft assume RESP liability like this," he said. "It's reasonable they care regarding fixing things." Verbal exchange and shining surveys overwhelmed online entertainment. However, Leon had purposely tried not to unveil what is happening. His objective, the quiet in Chloe Marks's condo, was stunning. She found a seat at her little feasting table, gazing vacantly at the sparkling screen of her PC. The authority and email from the aircraft's HR division was as yet open, the strong headline cutting through her disavowal like a blade. "Notice of end representative direct infringement." Chloe read the words over and over, her psyche getting a handle on for a smart method for supporting what had happened. The email was compact however tenacious in its judgment. "Your direct on Flight 267 abused our organization's guidelines of impressive skill and client care because of the seriousness of the grievances and ensuing discoveries during our examination. Your work with the carrier is thus ended, taking effect right now." Beneath the message, a rundown of explicit occurrences was framed, everyone a dooming sign of her activities, overlooking call lights, declining to help a traveler, and showing pompous way of behaving toward different clients. Chloe's hands shuddered as she shut the PC, her face pale. The truth of her circumstance weighed intensely on her chest, pushing down with choking out power. She had worked for the carrier for almost 7 years, building what she accepted was a steady profession. Now it was gone in a solitary second, a progression of decisions she had made without pondering the outcome. Days transformed into weeks, and Chloe's circumstance just developed more critical. The carrier business was little, and insight about her end spread rapidly. Each request for employment she submitted was met with quietness. Even situations outside the carrier business appeared to be far off. Her name had become inseparable from the very thing organizations needed to keep away from terrible exposure bills heaped onto the kitchen counter, and her investment funds dwindled quickly. The energetic public activity she had once delighted in vivacious days in and enthusiastic evenings, yet presently they were supplanted by lengthy desolate evenings in her minuscule loft. She abstained from going out, scared of running into previous collaborators or anybody who could perceive her general surroundings. Appeared to recoil the walls of her life shutting in. She went through hours replaying the occasions of that flight, taking apart every second, every decision she had made. The pomposity she had once worn as protective layer now felt like a weighty chain around. One day Chloe found a seat at her table, gazing through the window at the clamoring city beneath. A conveyance driver halted to assist an older lady with going across the road, cautiously adjusting her sacks as he directed her to the check. The basic thoughtful gesture carried tears to Chloe's eyes. She acknowledged at that time the profundity of her disappointment. She had been offered innumerable chances to show sympathy, to make somebody's day somewhat more straightforward, and she had wasted them. Generally her defeat wasn't just about losing her employment, it was about failing to focus on what it intended to be human. Chloe realized there was no fixing the past, no deleting the aggravation she had caused, yet she likewise realized she was unable to remain caught here of disappointment everlastingly. She made plans to reconstruct her life piece by piece, beginning with the one thing she had disregarded for such a long time, modesty. As she turned around to her PC, she opened another tab and started looking for volunteer open doors locally in the event that she was unable to fix the hurt she had caused. She could essentially begin setting things straight by improving each little demonstration in turn. Days after the groundbreaking gathering at the aircraft space camp, Leon Harper remained in his mom's nursery, watching her, keep an eye on her cherished blossoms. The morning sun washed the space in a brilliant shine, and the delicate murmur of honeybees swirled all around. Regardless of her age, Mrs. Evelyn Harper moved with beauty, her hands consistent as she managed a flower hedge, yet Leon proved unable help, however, notice the waiting exhaustion in her eyes, the scars of the irreverence she had gotten through mother. Leon called out tenderly, venturing onto the cushion with a little box in his grasp. Evelyn turned, her face illuminating with a comforting grin. Leon, dear, what brings you here so early? She asked, brushing soil from her gloves. Leon moved toward his suit, fresh and his presence as ordering as could be expected, yet before his mom there was a delicateness in his disposition, a weakness he seldom permitted others to see. He put the container on the table and took out a seat for her. I needed to bring you something, he expressed, motioning for her to sit. Evelyn eliminated her gloves and plunked down, looking at the case with interest. Leon, you didn't need to make a special effort for me, she said. However, her voice conveyed a note of play. Leon grinned, yet his tone was serious. Mother, what occurred on that flight wasn't simply an affront to you, it was an affront to all that you've shown me, approaching individuals with deference and nobility. I've done whatever it may take to ensure that sort of conduct is at no point ever endured in the future. Evelyn's eyes relaxed and she came to for his hand. Leon, you didn't need to do all that. I'm only one traveler, no mother, Leon said solidly, his voice thick with feeling. You're not only one traveler, you're my mom, and you merit the best, very much like any other individual. He signaled to the container, open it. Evelyn unfastened the strip cautiously, her fingers shaking somewhat with expectation. Inside was a smooth cowhide organizer emblazoned with gold lettering that read Lifetime Participation, Skylux Private Fly Administrations. She opened the envelope to find an individual personalized card with her name carefully printed underneath. The Organization's logo. Her breath hitched as she read the words to Mrs. Evelyn Harper, a lady of beauty, strength and nobility. This lifetime enrollment awards you admittance to Skyluxx Personal Luxury Plane. Administration's guaranteeing each excursion is just about as agreeable and conscious as you merit with adoration and appreciation. Leon. Tears filled her eyes as she gazed toward her child. Leon, I don't know what to say, she murmured, her voice shudder. This is an excess of. Leon bowed next to her, clasping her hand with his. It's insufficient, he expressed delicately. After all that you've accomplished for me, everything you've forfeited, this is only a little approach to saying thank you. Ought to never need to stress over being dealt with ineffectively again, whether you're flying the nation over or about to the supermarket. Evelyn's tears gushed out and she maneuvered Leon into an embrace. You've forever been a decent child, she said, her voice breaking. However, this implies more to me than I can adequately express. Leon held her firmly, his own eyes clouding. I love you, Mother, and I'll constantly ensure you're dealt with. As the personal luxury plane took off over the mists, Mrs. Evelyn Harper reclined in her seat, a satisfied grin gracing her face. The delicate murmur of the motors was a long ways from the chilly lack of concern she had persevered on that game-changing trip. In its place was warmth, regard, and the undeniable feeling of being esteemed. Not as Evelyn looked out at the perpetual field of sky, she felt a feeling of harmony she hadn't known in years. Her process was at this point not one of battle, however, of recharging, a demonstration of her child's affection and relentless purpose. At that time she knew that the respect taken from her had been re-established for herself as well as for incalculable other people who might now go with the affirmation that they made a difference. Thus a fair outcome was given and pride re-established. Evelyn Harper's story helps all of us to remember the significance of going to bat for what's right and approaching everybody with deference, regardless of their age or foundation. What is your take on Leon's activities? Let us in the remarks underneath. If this story impacted you, we should proceed with this discussion. Remember to buy into my feed, like this video, and offer it with others. You never know, one little thoughtful gesture could transform somebody's coexistence. How about we continue to cause disturbances of energy? Thank you for observing.